Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. I want to welcome you back to another exciting episode, Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Now, with each episode, I continue to promise you that I want to bring you these interesting and scintillating conversations with key Black leaders and influencers around the country, around the way, who are doing amazing things, and even doing things around the world. And today, you're in for a treat because this is no exception. My guest is Mr. Lance Davis. He is a community activist. He's a pastor. He answered a call when he was 9 years old, and he and I are about the same age. He's created nonprofit work that's fed tens of thousands of people in the south suburbs of Chicago. He has fallen in love with Ghana and the people of Ghana and has done some amazing things in that beautiful country that we're going to be talking about. He's got a beautiful wife, if I had a chance to meet and get to know over the years, and 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. And as I thought about this season, rising to the occasion, and what Black people do in the meanwhile, and not just waiting for white people to open doors or have an aha moment or to really walk out their wokeness, I thought, who do I want to come on and just talk about the importance of Black ingenuity and the importance of it now? And Lance Davis came to mind. So I want you all just to know that this is a personal friend, someone I look up to, and someone who I enjoy hanging out with. We've jumped out of planes together. We've ridden 4x4s, dune buggies. I forget what they're called. We snorkeled. We just had a lot of fun around the way. Lance, man, thank you for being my special guest on Black Like Me podcast. How are you doing today?
First, Dr. G, thank you for having me on this awesome podcast. And I'm doing well. Thank you. Doing better now that I've had an invite to the program.
Well, man, your story is so inspiring. So, man, listen, there's so many wonderful things that you're doing, things I want to talk with you about. But let me just jump right into it. With every episode, I ask my Black guest about Black icebreakers. Because other people just have icebreakers. You and I going to enough workshops. Let's have an icebreaker. Sure. But in Wisconsin, you're in Chicago. We have Black ice, and so I call them Black icebreakers. So I just want you to humor me. I just have a couple of questions for you that are just fun for just breaking the ice. Hey, this is before I even get into the questions. I'm going to ask you this because we're about the same age. You're almost 60. I'm 58. I'll be 59 this year. But I know we both grew up in Chicago, so some of these may be germane just to us, maybe some Southern influence. But do you remember when spring break wasn't called spring break? I'm just trying to see if that was my family or whether that was a West Side Chicago thing. Do you remember when spring break was called cleanup week?
It was called cleanup week. Isn't that something? Wow. You've put some age on us, but it was called cleanup week. Absolutely.
It was called cleanup week.
It wasn't a break.
No, not for
you
us.
spent time cleaning up the house, cleaning up the yard. Yes, it was cleanup week.
but Lance, but we're serious. I mean, the school called it cleanup week. Like on the calendar, it didn't say next week is spring break or next week is Easter break. They're like, next week is cleanup week. And you would, because you've been hibernating for the winter. You bring out those brooms and those mops and put away your old clothes. But okay, I'm not crazy because, I'm around people who aren't necessarily my age and from Chicago. But my mother called it that in Missouri. So I'm glad to hear that. So your family and your school refer to it as cleanup week also?
As a matter of fact, right before cleanup week, the school made the students clean up the school first before we went on our clean. Remember that? You'd have to clean up. All the books had to be brought down and all the dusting and all of that. Yes, you're bringing back memories now.
Wow. And Lance, let me tell you this. I've got a couple of other questions for you, but let me tell you why I do it. Because many of our white listeners need to be reminded that slavery and segregation didn't destroy Black people. Because one of my friends, Professor Christy Clark-Pujara, often states that a destroyed people don't create culture. So in the midst of the hardest situations, we created these cultures. And so you get folks like you and I, we've never had this discussion before, but yet we have these terminologies in common and these experiences. And so part of what I do is to show people the strength of Black sociology and the strength of Black social ties and storytelling. And so, yeah, I almost didn't put that one in because a lot of people wouldn't know it. So I'm so glad. I saw your face kind of think, wait a minute, I haven't said that in 50 years. That is what people call it. I love it. Hey, bro, growing up, was your breakfast of choice grits or cream of wheat?
Interestingly enough, when I was in kindergarten, it was grits with eggs, but guess who served the grits and eggs, scrambled eggs, while I was in kindergarten? It was the Black Panther Party.
You grew up during the Black Panther, where the Black Panther feeding program was going on?
Yeah, on Madison Avenue in Chicago. I went to Bernie School for kindergarten and first grade, and the Black Panther volunteers were the ones who brought in food for us to eat, and it was really for children who didn't have the resources, and I was blessed to have those resources, but I would prefer their breakfast over my parents.
So I take it the Black Panthers could cook.
Absolutely, and and it was men and women cooking.
Yes. See, Lance, I love that. You saw a little bit of that in Judas and the Black Messiah.
Sure.
In that story, because people forget that. They just think, the violence, that the Black Panthers was sort of the Black version of Helter Skelter and Charles Manson, but people forget it was a social service gathering, and they wanted to protect our communities when police weren't doing that. So,
Sure.
So for my Black listeners who don't know this, but the white listeners or non-Black listeners who aren't aware, you got to reread your history and read the real history, because this gentleman right here was fed by them, because that's what they did in communities like Chicago, Madison, and what? Because I lived off of Madison and
Madison Western. That's where the headquarters was. I was during the week, I stayed with my godparents, and would go back home on the weekends when I was young. And it had a lot to do with the redlining of the west side of the Austin area, where both my parents were business people, but they sent me to school near the Chicago Stadium, which was near the Black Panther headquarters, primarily because of the violence that was starting to creep up into the Austin area. And yeah, so during that period of time, I needed protection from the police department as well, primarily because as a small child, they would take us and have a spread eagle on the street for nothing. And so the Black Panther Party in that part of the west side of Chicago would prevent officers from accosting young kids. I never saw the violence of Black Panthers. I only saw their strength in resisting the brutality of kids who were defenseless, right? And so I had a very different viewpoint of them. And I also, as a child, remember when they were infused by people who were criminals, who were working on both sides. So yeah, it's a very different experience.
I keep telling this brother he needs to write a book or get his own podcast, because his stories are just, man, amazing. So y'all see, buckle up. This is going to be a great podcast episode. Did the Black Panthers give you sugar for your grits or salt and pepper?
No, it was just salt and pepper. And and can you imagine? The introduction of sugar, I saw as a child growing up, was the increase of violence. And so sugar, they knew at that time. They said, no, we don't use sugar. They spoke against candy. It was really interesting. Yes.
I need to have you back so we can talk just about that sometime, because I don't talk to many people who know that firsthand. So you grew up with your living with your godparents and so, and you're a good kid, so you probably didn't have to experience this. But did you or your siblings get what I call syllable spankings, like where your parents are talking to you in choppy?
Yes. I told you not to go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they had to be broken up.
You not to put sugar on your grits. Oh my goodness, man, this is good. You're doing well on this. Hey, Lance, do you remember? Again, your parents were business people, so they didn't do this. I had family that was a little bit more scandalous. But do you remember when people used to put bills in their kids' names? Like it'll be a telephone bill, and they would put it like in Junior's name. Like, can I speak to Billy? Can I speak to Billy Washington? I'm just a kid, but when you grew up and found out you didn't have credit because somebody put a phone in your name,
or a light bill or a gas
or a light bill
in anybody's name. not just the children. I mean, if they got access to information, it was a lot of, I went to school with a lot of kids who had bad credit and they were only 16 years old. So
man, Lance, listen, I threw this in at the last minute. And I gotta get onto the other discussion, but this is fun. When people are from my era and they know these things, it's funny. I was listening to an old throwback, and I said when I heard this, I said I have to ask Lance to finish this line of this song. Do you remember this song about being thankful? And then there's a line that says "Diamond in the back,
sunroof top, in the scene with the gangster lean."
Gangster lean. Ooh. Diamond. Oh man, we don't have enough time to get into Diamond in the back. Okay, just a couple more, Lance. This is so much fun. This was a bit of a trivia. I've never asked anyone this one.
Okay.
Which 1970s TV detective had a black secretary? Was it Columbo, Ironside, Mannix, or Kojak?
It was Mannix.
It was Joe Mannix.
Yes.
Man. Oh man, this is funny. Man, Mannix did. Mannix had, I think her name was Peggy. Her name was Gail Fisher. Her name was Peggy. But again, because he used to drink scotch or something. Remember, because Joe Mannix was cool. And he's a detective, and that's when you could drink and smoke and still be a detective. But
that's right. He was an alcoholic.
Oh my goodness. Okay, just a couple of others, Lance. Like this one, I've never asked anybody on the show. I keep asking, do you remember when Black folks used to eat Argo starch out of them blue boxes?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's true. Gail Fisher was the actress. She was
the actress. Argo starch is what you really
Argo starch was a blue box.
In the blue box,
basically chalk. Yep, and folks like my family, there were the ladies in my family who would every now and then take a few of those.
Women ate it. It didn't seem like men ate it as much.
I never saw a man eat it. Now I snuck it.
I would too, because I wanted to know what it was.
I wanted to know what it was, and I was like, it tastes like chalk. So
it tastes like chalk, but they'd be outside playing rope and stuff. Somebody would have a box of Argo, and it wouldn't be just general starch. It'll be Argo. I can still see it sideways with the blue box and the white letters, I guess because it's from Argo, Illinois. People would pour it in their hands like sunflower seeds and eat chalk. And I don't know, that is
I never understood. It was for cooking, right? It's cooking starch? But
no, starch. I mean, you could use it for starch, but if you read the back, it talks about using it to boil water, to put shirts in it to starch them. Like it was an actual starch. It's kind of like cornstarch. You could use like cornstarch, but it was like a cornstarch. Also, wow, man. Lance, listen, I gotta have
didn't do irreparable damage to our bodies.
No, it didn't do anything that Captain Crunch and Crunch Berries didn't do.
You're right. and Count Dracula.
Count
Dracula.
And Fruity Pebbles.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, man! That was fun to walk down that memory lane. As I mentioned, Lance, the theme is rising to the occasion, because when you begin to see what we witnessed in our world in the last 2 years, the pandemic, police brutality and shooting unarmed Black men is not new. But with the advent of social media and digital cameras and phones and all, we're catching more stuff. Not that matters in every case, but the world seemed to pause a little bit, probably because of the pandemic, and we're spending so much time in front of our TV screens and our computer screens. People just saw a lot, and I just noticed more non-Black people having a bit of an aha. And I realized that if Black people wait until a collective aha among white people, we'll take a huge step back, because we can't just wait for people to say aha and then change everything that has either benefited them or so interwoven into their economics or their way of living that when they get the courage to untangle it, it's too late, too much time has gone by. But it seems like when Black people begin to say, we're going to take care of ourselves, we're going to start businesses, we're going to use our ingenuity, we get better traction. And so that's the thing, rising to the occasion. Like, what are people doing in the meanwhile? And what are some of the examples of Black ingenuity? And so I just have always loved your discussion over the years about your love for Ghana. And I'm going to get into like some of the wonderful things you've done there. But just tell me a little bit about how that love for Ghana developed for you.
Sure.
And the people of Ghana.
Yeah, interesting. So at the birth of social media with MySpace, I had gotten an account and immediately got a message from a man who asked, "Is this the same Lance who used to talk about going to Africa when we were in 5th grade?" And I had to respond, yes. And this person, we hadn't seen each other since grade school, but the one thing he remembered about me is that I would always talk to my fellow students about one day going to Africa. And then primarily, my interest was piqued because my white teachers talked so negatively against it. And because I was a dark-skinned, male student, I had to sit, all of us had to sit further to the back. The better students, which had a lighter hue, could sit in the front. So I didn't necessarily.
People need to know you're not making this up. This is real.
Oh, this is real. And so anything that my teachers disliked, I picked up as, well, maybe I need to investigate because maybe I would like it because I knew they didn't like me, right? And so the more I read about West Africa, the more I read about Ghana as being the gateway to Africa. I just fell in love at that point, and I'd never been. And it was until I was 29 years old until I had enough money to actually go. And when I went there, I knew that that's where I was supposed to spend a lot of my energy, to expend my energy in helping and teaching and preserving history and teaching about the true history of not just slavery, but also about the true history of Alekbalan. Have you ever heard of that? Alekbalan.
I have not.
How about Ortygia? Ortygia.
No.
So these are the original names and the ancient names of the continent that we now know called Africa. Africa is named after a person or an explorer, but the entire continent has such a rich history that's been, in a sense, wiped out of the history books. And so when I talk about teaching, I want to be able to teach not just, African Americans, but all Americans about the depth and the richness of the continent, and more specifically West Africa. Because if it weren't for the gold of West Africa, specifically the Gold Coast, which is now called Ghana, if it were not for the human resources that were put on labor camps throughout the world, I don't call them plantations, I call them labor camps. If it weren't for this free labor and the gold, the world would look really different than it does today. So this a huge move to amass wealth at the expense of human labor, which was snatched from not just their land, but also snatched out of their right minds, if you will.
Sure.
And then, because that's why the institution of the door of no return, all slave dungeons where slaves were held, as they were exiting through a small door, by this time, 3 to 6 months, they've been malnourished, they've only eat, once a day, sometimes that whatever. They went through a door called the door of no return. And so the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the British, all of those who enslaved, and of course our country, all of those who enslaved, it was understood that once these human beings walk through the door of no return, they lose their humanity, they lose their sense of worth as it relates to being humans, and they are forever subjected to perpetual enslavement for 1,000 years. So we were never ever supposed to discover where we came from. So today, because of the work of historians and folks who have not allowed for the history to die, African Americans who return to Ghana are able to go through a door, what is called the door of return. And yes. I call that the door of gaining your sanity and your sense of self-worth, and your understanding of what you were really called to do. And I see
Right.
it happen to people. I've been seeing it for 20 years. People wake up to a realization that I am more than what I've been called for the last 20, 30, 40 years, however old the person is.
Lance, it's almost like a deprogramming. I mean, I remember you got a little salty with me when I went to Ghana because you've been asking me to go with you, and I still want to do that, but I ended up getting a grant so that I could go for the year of return, and I went into two of those major dungeons. One is in Cape Coast, and what's the other
Yes.
one called?
And Elmina. Mhm.
Elmina. And as we stood there, I saw the doors, those narrow doors of no return. And just I got a chance to open it and just look out at the sea and just ask what it must have been like to walk through those doors, maybe not even fully sure that you were never going to see your family again. Because again, the Ghanaians didn't speak Portuguese or Spanish or English. And but to see that space, but to know that I came from someplace and I saw the richness and the beauty and the shoreline, it was like being pulled out of a matrix. I looked around and I thought, I used to think, thank God I was raised in America. Think about the things that I received because I'm an American. And I looked at the beauty of that land and thought, who could I have become if I had remained here? It just changed instantly as I saw that, Lance. It was a deep programming, feeling so grounded and connected to the land, thinking, I don't just come from the Mississippi Delta. I'm not just an escapee, a descendant of escapees. That wasn't the plan. And so you how many trips have you made since then?
Well, I've been back and forth well over 55, 60 times. I have a home there. I have, we have our family land there, of course. But the businesses that I set up years ago, it's I would call it a second home, but I have to say it's just home.
It's just, oh man, it's just home. So tell me about this first business you started, or maybe not the first one, but it's the one I remember you telling me about first, where you would just use some ingenuity. Was it to get a drill or something? I'm trying to make sure I'm not getting this mixed up with a movie I watch. But you actually created a mining business. Am I remembering that correctly?
Sure. Yeah. I was, really in traveling with the Jimmy Carter Institute to study guinea worm. Guinea worm is just it's a parasite that grows. The egg is invisible. You get it when you drink surface water.
Sure.
Water is really hard to come by. 90% of children in sub-Saharan Africa, infants, they die because of a lack of fresh drinking water, and not because of poverty, not because of AIDS or anything. It's just the lack of fresh drinking water. So dysentery, river blindness, guinea worm. And as I looked at the effects of the guinea worm on the human body and looking at children who were writhing in pain as these worms were exiting their body that were 36 to 48 inches long, and looking at the way in which we are able to prevent villages from drinking that water is to do what the Carter Center was doing, that is to provide screens so that the girls who are the traditional water bearers who bring the water back from maybe a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, they bring the water and they bring it to the family basin. When you pour the water in, then they had these screens that would screen out the guinea worm eggs because they're invisible. For me, I just believe that folks just have fresh potable water. And I didn't have the funds to do it. I never asked my church to sponsor me in my trips to Ghana. So I began working with folks who were involved in mining, gold mining, began to learn the business and began to just invest in some of the work that they were doing, either rock crushing, stayed away from the illegal surface water mining because that was destroying the waterways. And the reason why I wanted to get into mining was to get enough money to purchase my own rig for drilling, BTH Drill, and to start drilling these boreholes wherever I felt led to go, right? And so eventually, so I opened up, I started a Coben mining, and did that for about 2 years until I had enough to purchase a rig, other equipment, got a relationship with one of the chief hydrologists in Ghana who taught me how to drill, who taught me where to drill. And so from there, I started drilling boreholes in the northern region, Brangahafo, the Volta region, the eastern region like Kufaridra and other communities like that, where I got a chance to see, 80-year-old women standing there watching as the ground is about to crack, we will say. You drill down so deep, 30, 40, 50 feet. Today, you're drilling 75, 80 feet. There's a huge drought in the world, but especially in Africa. But you drill, and so the pressure of the water in these underground lakes is so, it's pressurized to the extent that we bring the drilling apparatus out, and the water would crack through the ground and explode through the hole. And it's like a gusher, right? It's like an oil gush of water. And to see the looks on these women's faces, to see fresh water, clean water for the first time in years and years and years made it all worthwhile, Dr. G.
Man, I mean, I'm having this image of this gusher. I bet they danced underneath that water as it was coming.
Oh yeah,
up.
well, we all did, right? Because it's not, you could spend a lot of money, and I had spent a lot of money on what was called non-productive holes. You could drill and you'd never get water. We didn't have the technology, right, to tell us exactly how deep and what underground issues we'd run into, right? So when we did get water, it was a blessing for all. And then we would cap it. Eventually, I went from just the hand pumps to submersible electrolyzed pumps that would feed into an overhead tank, like water tanks you see in the neighborhoods today, and then would gravitationally feed to the various, either to the girls' dorms, which is what we've been known to do. We've built girls' shower rooms, and a lot of what I do as far as water is to prevent girls from having to leave out of their homes and out of their villages at 4 or 5 in the morning, and to travel 5 that way and another 4 girls this way and another 6 girls this way, only to be kidnapped by Boko Haram when I'm drilling in Bogatanga, which is in northern Ghana, which is along that stretch where they would kidnap these young ladies. So if I could drill a borehole in their community, then it keeps them safe, number one, right? And then number two, the number one reason why girls were not going to school is because they are absolutely dead tired. They have brought the water to the village, and therefore they don't attend class. But now that water is in the village, the girls are able to have an equal opportunity for education like the boys.
Wow, man, Lance, that's amazing. Bro, how did you learn all the, hydraulics and drilling and bits and what'd you call it, a BTH drill or
BTH
something like
down
that?
the hole. Yeah, down the hole.
How did you learn to do that? Because it's not like you learn to do that in Garfield Park or Douglas Park on the west side of Chicago, man. How did you pull that together?
Yeah, the first thing that I would do is look at the need, right? And not walk in as a colonizer saying, I'm here to help you and I'm here to save you. I wasn't there to preach to anyone. I wasn't there to tell anyone how to live. I went there as a student to find out what it is that I could do as a guy from the west side of Chicago who somehow or another, through a miracle, because most of my friends were dead by the time I was 16 years old or in prison. And so I wanted to be able to give back in a substantive and meaningful way. So as I got to Ghana and I became a student, the moment that I would understand what was needful and would talk to village elders and village leaders and chiefs about what was needful for community, I would go home and then do my research to figure out how I can do that. How can I help? And somehow or another, when I would get back to my next trip, get back to Ghana, it's like everything would just fall into place for me. Like meeting Dr. Paul Atta, who is no longer with us, who was this chief a hydrologist, who was a person who he was using the Afrodiv pump for hand pumping, utilizing that for pumping water for years and years. And the Afrodiv pump was created by a person from the Evangelical Covenant Church 50 years ago. So just you talk about serendipity, right? All these
Right.
things would line up, and then and shortly after he taught me everything he knew, he had a stroke and died. And so I just felt
Wow.
the need to continue on that legacy. It was he poured into me and gave me the information that I needed that I couldn't get online.
Man, that's amazing. Now, you also did some drilling for gold too, didn't you? I mean, so did the technology that you learned about hydraulics and tapping into the water source, did that technology help you? Because your desire was to really create jobs so that the Ghanaians could work for themselves and not be further colonized. So am I
Sure.
remembering that part of the story?
Sure,
Right.
absolutely. And that was on the front side. The gold was the gold mining collection of dust was to finance what I wanted to do with water, right? So ultimately,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So I taught myself about rock mining, about the aggregate mining, about quarrying, so that I would understand and I would know what I was talking about when I went into the bush, right? And I wanted to learn as much as I could, and then go to the government, the ministry of metals and mines, and then to get a concession and to work the concession and to do that, not long term, even though I did provide a lot of jobs for many Ghanaians. In doing so, that was not the end goal. The end goal was to acquire the funding necessary to get the equipment so that I could drill for water.
Now, okay, Lance, and I know I mess with you a whole lot. I mean, we have a lot of fun at each other's expense, but man, that's just freaking brilliant to go there and figure out that I want to do this and leverage the resources to in order to clean the waters. I mean, there are people with more resources than you, and we're also mining for gold and finding it, but they were
Mhm,
taking that gold back home. They were
mhm,
getting weighed and taking it back home. But
mhm.
you did that in order to create jobs, and so you must have seen people getting healthier, people getting happier, but also
Mhm.
people having a perspective of their Black American family members that perhaps they didn't have before because they just didn't have very much interaction with us.
Yeah, the first thing, the misconception is that, West African people don't like African Americans, when in fact that is a gift from the colonizing methodology of missionary work, right? Of teaching both
Come on,
sides to hate each other, the divide and conquer. Yeah,
instigating.
instigating fights and that kind of thing. But usually, as you saw when you went to Ghana, that they say to you, welcome home. There is not
Yes,
a
yes.
dislike of you. There is not a disdain. There is not a fear of you. They tell you, welcome home. I'm glad you were able to make your way back home. That's number one. The other thing that is important to know as far as um, you know how we are, the work that I was doing, um, it was more healing for me, Dr. G, um, because when I'm in the bush, if
Yes.
I'm in the jungle and I'm drilling or I'm involved in some, rock crushing, where we would process rocks, right, to get the gold dust, um, I, they were already happy. They were already content. They were
Right.
impoverished. There was no violence. So Black plus poverty does not equal violence is the first thing that I learned.
Come on. Come on.
It was more,
Absolutely.
yeah, it was more for me to glean and to gain than for me to give.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I received way more than I could have ever possibly given the Ghanaian communities.
Man, man. So how did your family, how did they describe the change they saw in you? Because I'm sure with every trip, if you're over there drilling, it's not like you're gone 2 or 3 days. And so that must have been a few weeks. As you came
Sure.
back, did your wife, did your kids, your colleagues say, hey man, there's something different. You've changed, or you have a different air about you, as the older folks would say. Tell me how others responded to the more enlightened you as you'd come home between trips.
Well, my wife and I have been together since we were 17 years old. So this is a
That's
person
right.
who saw
You
me.
all went to high school together, right?
We went
You
to
all
high
went to high
school
school.
together. So right after my first trip, I had an extended trip to Senegal, Gambia, and Ghana. When I came home, my wife picked me up from the airport. And by the time we got home, she said, "You're different. Something has changed." So she
Wow.
knew it between from the ride to, from O'Hare Airport to the south suburbs, something is different. Something has changed. And it had. Um, I was a person who longed for life in West Africa, just to experience it, to touch the ground, because I knew as a kid, me not having an association with the land. I went to Holy Trinity High School at first, and so um, there I went. I was in school with Italians and Germans and Latinos, and it was all boys school. And so I learned about different cultures, and I realized that everyone had a land, and the only land that I had any attachment to was a land that defined me either as 3/5 of a human being, or
Come
as a
on.
criminal, or as a slave, or a runaway, or an escapee, or an imbecile. I don't know if you know about those words of imbecile and numbskull. Those were code words to determine a Black person back in the 1950s, the 1940s and 1950s, to kind of, that was they're an imbecile. It was, and a numbskull. So the things that I had learned about who we are in being a part of this land, I knew that that was not our true history. And I needed to go where our true history comes from, because I believe that much of the psychological damage that happened to Black folks in America, where you see the violence, where you see the irreverence, when you see some of the psychosocial issues that we suffer from today, is really
Right.
because it's a people who have no attachment to anything that is lasting, no attachment to land. And that's why a person who is white, who lives in a trailer home, can look down upon me as an executive, because they know where they come from. And the person who is an executive is still second guessing, right? And has to then assimilate to culture in order to survive whatever field they're in. And so there's something that I call assimilation psychosis, where after a while, African Americans no longer know who they really are. And so they'll even say things like, "Well, I'm an African American, but I'm not African." Well, that's an oxymoron, right?
I remember hearing that growing up.
Yeah. So, and it's this eschewing, and it's this dismissing of a place where technically that's where your DNA came from. And so I've been hosting trips for nearly 20 years for African Americans back to Ghana, to go through the door of return. And 100% of the time, Dr. G, number one, everyone tells me I'll never be the same. And number two, I can't believe how I have devalued my own life for so long.
Same two things happened to me. I could attest to both of those things. And that's the ugliness of colonialism. That's the ugliness of the slave trade. It's not just that it ended. Many times our white counterparts will just say, "Come on, that ended 150 years ago. Why do you guys keep talking about it?" Because we both know the systems, the mentality, the attitudes, the ideas, filling in the inner cities, getting crack and drugs into them, the continued bombardment with negative stuff about ourselves and our history, to get us more tied to this land, to be more to become more symptoms or victims of the assimilation psychosis that you talked about, still continues.
Yeah.
That I walked in there as 50-something-year-old, thinking I didn't know what I was missing by not knowing who I was. I was there with the founder of or the CEO and founder of African Ancestry, the only one of the DNA companies that's led by and owned by a woman of color.
Yes.
She's a sister out of DC. And so we went in August, but we took the DNA test in July, and we're told that the reveal would take place in the slave dungeon in Cape Coast. And so we're sitting inside this dungeon. You can see where all the cannons were, not protecting African people, but protecting, Europeans from Europeans who are coming in to have access to the gold. So they have this whole fort to protect their own interest in this foreign land. And I found out that my family was from Guinea-Bissau. They traced it through a matriarchal lineage. So I found out that my mom's mother's mother was from Guinea-Bissau. But more specifically, they could tell in our DNA that we were from the Balanta tribe, and Balanta means resistant, which is indicative of how my family thinks. My mother, my grandmother, my sister, my daughter. But the DNA inside of us still tied us to the land. And this is what Dr. Gina Page said before she started calling us out and telling us where we were from based upon our DNA testing. She said over 400 years ago, because this is for the year of return in 2019, we were stolen from this land and everything was taken from us. Our parents, our land, in some cases our children, our dreams, our aspirations. She said they took everything from us, even our knowledge of and love for our country. She said, but with DNA testing and its development, we have found that there's one thing that they could not steal from us, and that's our DNA. And our DNA has been analyzed, and it ties us back to specific region. Man, it felt like a church revival. It felt like, I mean, it was a spiritual renewal that took place. And it was just 300 of us over there experiencing that. Think about the 40, 50 million Black people who have no idea who they are really and where we're from and what that means to us and what the absence of that knowledge has cost us.
Sure. It's great to be the tool used to build the roads, build the railroads, to build up a civilization, which calls itself great today, but not be able to share in that greatness is another trauma on top of trauma.
Yes, it is.
When I hear about my colleagues and my friends who are white, when they share with me that my great-grandfather came here with $20 in his pocket and had to pull himself up by the bootstraps and really had to work, and he instilled in the entire family hard work, isn't my testimony that my great-great-great-great-grandfather was brought here, snatched from his neighborhood, snatched from his community, brought here on his back on a boat with $0 in his pocket and $0 to his name because he wasn't considered a human being? Isn't that also a history worth repeating? Isn't that a story that has value? So when people say, well, we got to get over slavery, well, that is a part of our family, our familial lineage. So what you're saying is that your familial lineage doesn't have as much weight and importance as my story of coming from Ireland, or my story coming from Herzegovina, or my story coming from wherever. And all of our stories are equal, and all of us are human beings, and we need to embrace each other's history. But why is there so much pushback against this history of Blackness? Is because ultimately when you do that, you have to then accept the fact that the nation is great because it was built on free labor. And there's gold that has enriched. I mean, Queen Elizabeth is the one who sits on the most gold of any ruler, of any person, the British Empire, right? That gold came directly from Ghana, and it's one of the reasons why the United Kingdom is wealthy to this day, because of the gold that was taken from West Africa. I think that those are things that should be acknowledged. And I think that that brings about healing to human beings, no matter where they are. And it should be salvific, not just for Black people, but for whites as well, because it's very difficult to have to live your life thinking that you are a savior. We're not saviors. Yeah, and you're not supreme simply because of your color.
Definitely. So you're saying baby Archie ought to get some of that gold because they came from the motherland.
I'm just saying, Riri and Nene should have something.
They should. You know, something about Queen's grandson, you know, Prince Harry's son, you know, baby Archie.
Yeah, I mean,
Meghan, you know, Markle, they got Black roots, and so you know, she's married into a monarch that is a monarch, because of gold that's from the motherland. The irony of that, and people
You talk about it.
His place inside the king. He's British and he's African and American.
Yes.
It's very. We have a very interesting and tormented history, and unless we take a look at it, we really can't move forward. And for those white folks whose ancestors came here, who chose to come here, they landed at the shores of a country that had already been enriched by free labor.
Correct.
If there's a rail system, if there's a banking system, if there's an insurance system, or if there's just a developed society, if there are cities, where did that wealth come from? And we understand this, we understand this history, but for people to come and talk about their experience and they pull themselves up by their bootstraps, I tell people, your bootstraps were my great-great-grandmother. That's what I know, because I've met my white relatives who are descendants of the G plantation. Mm-hmm. Their bootstraps were Venus, who was raped by Reuben and had my great-great-grandfather. So you put yourself up by your bootstrap, but you neglected to say that the bootstraps were Black free labor or Native Americans who you killed and other people you enslaved.
That's problematic. And I believe that, that's problematic.
I like that phrase, that's problematic.
In our country, there's much that we're experiencing today because we have not accepted the realities. People, are afraid of the conversation of reparations, and we're not afraid of the conversation of reparations with the casinos for our indigenous brothers and sisters. We're not afraid of mentioning reparations for those who were in, Japanese internment camps. But when it comes down to the people who were here to build the infrastructure of the country, like Washington, D.C. itself, that's a problem. And so to not accept that and not say, well, we don't even need to talk about reparations. We just need to talk about history. But for our white sisters and brothers to not say at one point in time that, wait a minute, we don't know the full history of the African American in this country. And now there's a move afoot to stop telling their history because it's entitled as critical race theory. So you hear about a topic, you hear about a title, you hear about some acronym, and now that's the reason why Black children shouldn't understand where they came from, the greatness that they have, what they have contributed, relationally to this country to make it great. I think that that's what's problematic. We need to recognize that all stories in America are credible, that they are important, and that those stories make the next generation stronger, and it makes that next generation more responsible to making the nation better, not worse, not more divided. And I think that that's we're at a crossroads as a nation.
We definitely are.
Hi, this is Amy from Eugene, Oregon. I listen to Black Like Me because I want to hear different perspectives and push myself out of my comfort zone as a white person. I support the podcast as a Patreon because it's an awesome show and I know it takes a ton of work and effort to make it all happen.
Hey, what's up, Black Like Me family? This podcast is changing the conversation about race in America. By going to patreon.com/Black Like Me and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also helping to create better content and, more importantly, joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty and creating a better society. And as a patron of the podcast, you'll have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. So to become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/Black Like Me or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing. Thank you in advance.
Lance, what I appreciate about you, brother, and your brilliance is that when you consider men like us and strong Black women like our wives and our sisters and folks we love and we work with, people want to look at our success, our articulation, things we've published, things we've created. You built businesses in West Africa. I'm creating a Center for Black Excellence in Culture and Jobs for people, and believing that there can be Black leadership and non-Black people who follow it. When we experience success, people don't expect us to still talk about the true enigma of slavery, because they feel that we're proof that those systems weren't really that bad. Because if they were that bad, how would you have a Lance Davis? How would you have an Alex G? And so we are an enigma in that we have learned, in spite of the system, to play the system in order to still get our education, and in order to learn how to navigate in predominantly white spaces and power spaces. I think you and I probably is just still sort of surprised when we look at some of the circles we find ourselves in, look around and think, who would have thought it? But we can't become drunk with the wine of this world, the riches of this world. We can't fool ourselves into thinking that because we've made it, that we're proof that those systemic realities don't exist. They exist. We've just been able to rise above them. And we have a responsibility to help others overcome that by dismantling the systems and still raising people up. And is that accurate, that we've got, that the work continues? And sometimes people are, I don't know if they're befuddled that we would experience the level of success that we have, but are still disenchanted at the realities of systemic racism and its impact.
You're spot on. I will tell you that again, the assimilation psychosis that we have to experience sometimes it's because of a sheer ignorance, and then the dismissal of your color. I'll give you a case in point. My wife is a medical doctor. When she was, I won't mention the institution, I won't mention the hospital, but she had just become a certified physician, right? Licensed physician. And she's in this hospital, north side of Chicago. She walks into a room to greet an elderly white woman who was her patient. And the white woman says, "What are you here for?" She says, "Oh, my name is Dr. Davis." She says, "Oh, well, I tell you what, why don't you go out there and find a real doctor so that I can be seen?" This is not 80 years ago.
No,
this is not antebellum slavery. This is a woman who has had to pull herself up by the bootstraps, who has had to take the same test as anyone else, who has had to go through everything else, the Q3s and the sleepless nights. But because she's a Black woman, right? She's told that you're not a real doctor. Do you know how many times that was repeated to her? So if my wife walked around with anger, right, then she would be called an angry Black woman, but any woman would be right to be angry at a system that would dare call them unprepared, even though they have prepared themselves just as much, and in many cases, even more than their white counterparts. This is something we need to accept. We need to see, we need to repent of it, we need to lament because of it, and then move past it. We can't move past it because we just have not accepted those realities. That somebody's mother or grandmother was that person who said that to my wife, who gave birth to 4 children, who now has to protect them, right, from a world that would dare, as I have, educators and 2 engineers and marketing specialists among my children. The reality is that we've had to protect them from a world that would swear that they are not competent and that they're not prepared simply because they're Black.
Yes. Bro, I just have to be quiet for a minute, just let that settle with people. Because folks who want to be allies can't merely commiserate with us and just say, "That's awful, that sucks." You have to understand that that's a real world, and it's perpetuated by people who you may know or are related to or work with. And when you see those things happen, you can't say, "Well, I'm sure the patient didn't mean that." You have to understand what this means and what it costs. And so if folks are going to be allies, you don't just huddle up with us and just say, "That's awful that you got to go through this." you need to be able to say to the people who say these kinds of things, shut the hell up. This is a board certified doctor. We are a physician. We are lucky to have her. And if you say it again, we're going to leave you on that bedpan for a couple of days.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, and until we have those, I think about the number of times you and I have had to defend our white brothers and sisters because we have some brothers. I've had to do it in Chicago with the Nation of Islam, right? Who has titled white folks as being the devil. I've had to be courageous, and I've had to be very forthright, and I've had to be spiritual in addressing these brothers and saying that you've got that wrong. It is not right to call all white people devils. And yes, there are some devilish acts that folks commit, but you're out of order there. And like I say to my sisters and brothers who are white, that you have to be as courageous for me and my family as I've been for you. We have to be courageous together. And when I see people kind of say, "Oh, Lance, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with it," I'm not looking for your sorrow. I'm looking for us to rise to the occasion, which is what this broadcast is about. Rising to the occasion means rising to the point of being courageous to speak truth to even your own family.
Yes, that's what you got to do if this is going to be real. Hey, man, last thing, I can't believe how fast this time is going, but you are a tremendous storyteller and just full of so much information. It got to be, and I mean, with Black people, folks who told stories were liars because we weren't allowed to say the word lie because lie was cussing. So I chuckled when I said, you are an amazing storyteller, because it sounded like I was cussing you out. I mean this in the purest way. You're a great storyteller in what you convey. Most recently, you were bestowed with a special honor. You sent a picture. I saw you wearing like traditional, looked like kente cloth, but traditional cloth, and you had sandals on. And I don't know if you was holding the umbrella, somebody was holding the parasol over you. But tell me about this latest honoring this happened to you. Are you now a chief?
So there's always been an honor bestowed upon African Americans who have exhibited a desire to help and to support various villages in Africa. Okay. There's one particular village that I have pretty much put my family name on as it relates to helping this village in their education. My daughter and son, they're raising funds for the educational system of this village. I have, thrown celebrations for this village. And so this last March, I wanted for earlier in March, I wanted for the group that was touring with us to see this village and to meet the chief and to see what a village palace looks like. And when we arrived, there was this big derby, huge gathering of the village and surrounding village chiefs and what have you. And I'm wondering what's going on. And it was at that time that they took me to another part, that took my guest to the palace, and I went into a room. And that was when I was being installed, if you will. We would call it installed, but there the power of rulership and authority is with the stool. And so the land is called stool lands. That's who controls the stool. So whoever sits on the stool is speaking on behalf of the stool, the ancestors and what have you. And so, I was made the equivalent of a local worshiping, or what we might call a development chief. So I was not just given an honorary chieftaincy, but I was made the development chief for this village that's on thousands and thousands of acres, and they are calling on me to help develop it into a community where internationals are able to come and to enjoy themselves in the central region, which is really just a stone's throw from the Elmina slave castle. And so it was a huge honor. They took my clothes off, they put these other clothes on me, whispered some things to me as it relates to the family. My name then became Nana Kwame Kwajie IV. So I am named after the lineage of the chiefs for that particular village. Kwaji goes back a couple of thousand years, right? And so it was
Wow.
such a huge honor. And yes, so the parasol, the spokesperson for the chief, he was the one who was holding the parasol, and it was just letting the village know that I was being brought into this role. And so yeah, it was really
Man,
interesting. It was such an honor and a moment I'll never forget.
Lance, that first of all, let me just say I'm proud.
Thank you.
Second, congratulations. That is amazing. And from what I know of you, from what I've heard, even in this conversation, I know that it is well deserved. But the irony is that someone of your caliber, of your ilk, of your intelligence, has to catch one or two planes and do an overnight and land in another continent, another hemisphere, in another time zone, to get the kind of honor that you and I will never get in this country. But thank God there are places that see us.
Yes. Yes.
This is why we won't forget Africa. This is why we won't forget Mother Africa, because it's a place where we can be seen and not just looked at, not just observed, not just inspected, not even surveillanced. Is that a word? Can I say surveillance?
Yes, I just want to add to that real quick. Someone asked me, why do you love going to West Africa so much? And I said, well, I have work to do there. I have a calling there, but I will tell you, it feels good to not be stared at because of my color, because we're all the same color. And there, they don't care what color you are. So if I got off the plane white, it doesn't matter. What do I bring to society? What do I bring to humanity? And how do I act with other human beings, right? And how do I interact? So I'm thankful, like you, I'm thankful that there's a place that sees me for who I am as a human being and doesn't judge me because of the color of my skin.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it, man. Last question, man. If you could travel back in time and sit down and have a 2-hour breakfast with any of the founding members of the Black Panther Party, who would you sit down and talk with?
Huey Newton.
Really?
Huey Newton. One of the, see, we are able to criminalize folks in this country, and therefore everybody goes along with it. He's,
Yes,
he's criminal. He was just a young kid who wanted freedom for Black people in this country. That's it. Just stop beating us, stop shooting us, stop redlining our communities. And so, yeah, I would love to just be able to have that conversation and not to get anything from him because I've studied his life enough, but to let him know that there are some people who appreciate him and love him. And it was our own government that infiltrated the Black Panther Party and made it into what we know today as a violent party. That was not what it was built up to be. And it's not, yeah. And that's where the gangs came from. It's the same, the same thing with street gangs. That came from federal dollars, right? And that's a whole and that's another conversation, but we need to know the truth about where these nefarious and these destructive organizations, what is the genesis? Where did they get their start from? And it usually starts from this perpetuation of the message that Black men are dangerous, Black men are criminals, and they can't be trusted.
Wow. And to be honest, it didn't stop with the Black Panthers or street gangs. When I was in Ghana, I had a chance to go to the museum that talked about the life and accomplishments of President Kwame Nkrumah.
Yes.
And just hearing the story about the infiltration of the U.S. government into that world, into causing him to flee from his own throne. And so we have to talk about some of that as well, that we've been doing a whole lot of meddling around the world.
We have.
Listen, Lance, I was thinking, in this podcast, I've been trying to find correspondence. Like I've got one gentleman out of Atlanta who's a psychologist. And so if something happens and it's really messing with the Black psyche, or I'll have him on and say, how does this impact Black psychology? Or let's break down, simulation psychosis in medical terms. I have other people, depending on their backgrounds, may come and comment on stuff. I would really love for you to consider being one of my consultants or commentators who may come on from time to time on issues that pertain Pan-Africanism or ties between Africa and African Americans, or some of those cultural discussions that tie us together. That when those issues pop up inside the media, I would love to have you back on from time to time just to help me unpack some of those things, because I really appreciate your perspective.
I will tell you, first of all, I'm honored that you would ask. I would say yes, I would be willing to do that, because I am wholly committed to the work that you do, because I know you and I know your heart and I know the calling that you have on your life. And so I consider it an honor to be asked to do that.
Well, brother, thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with my brother, my friend who's born in and raised in the city that I was born in, Chicago, Illinois. I probably had one of the most thorough Black icebreaker discussions in a long time. And so my special guest has been Lance Davis, pastor, leader, community developer, development chief, husband, father, godfather, uncle, and spokesperson for Justice Extraordinaire. And so I'm so glad that you're here today. So glad that you all have had a chance to listen. Listen, I want you to take this episode, listeners, and I want you to process it. I want you to listen to it a couple of times, and I want you to tweet it out. I want you to put it on your social media. I want you to share it with your friends, because this is great information. And what we provide you with here on Black Like Me is a Black perspective that you might not get from your neighbors, your bosses, co-workers, but you get a chance to listen here. And what we want you to do is lean in and be changed. Don't just laugh or be commiserated or commiserate with us. Become transformed through these conversations, because we don't need podcast voyeurs. We need people who are transformed, who help to change that world out there, because our children, your children, deserve better. We're doing our work by telling the story and being on the grind every day, but you need to do your part of the story in helping to dismantle these sickening racist systems so that we can all be seen the way Mr. Davis and the way I am and feel in West Africa. So you all have a great day. Thank you so much for your supporters and for our patron supporters. Because of that support, I continue to do what I do. Thank you all so much. And again, Mr. Davis, thank you for being my special guest today.
Thank you for having me.
Black Like Me. Black like me.
Now, I've got some special shout outs to the many talented members of our ever-growing production team. Eli Steenlich, who produces the show and handles all of our social media. Don Thornton, my podcast manager, who keeps things running smoothly and arranges all of my interviews. Jeremy Holiday, who edits the podcast. Corey Saffold, who created this year's theme music, and Marcus Fleming on the vocals. And of course, Jakisha Hunt, who is responsible for our fabulous new podcast merch.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Black like me.